Hello and welcome back to the Fruit of Grisaia, Amane's route. In the last episode, 2 days went by, one with heavy rain and the other with barely anything happening. The situation for the girls on the basketball team in the valley is getting more and more dire, as their supplies of food are running low and tensions are running higher. Let's continue. The 7th day in the valley. Status quo unchanged. The end. No, I guess that's a bit too extreme in a abridged version. We'd now spent a solid week shipwrecked. Naturally, no one was running around like chickens with their head cut off anymore. Our lives had taken on the repetitive quality of a long-running television show that's decayed into a pale imitation of its former self. The kind you keep watching every week out of sheer inertia. Although we were thoroughly sick of eating, or even looking at the vile plant soup that had become a primary sustenance, its proportion of our diet was only rising. The amount of rice distributed to us was decreasing steadily with each passing day. And even the edible grasses that had seemed so infinitely abundant at first were vanishing with alarming swiftness from the picked-over areas near the entrance to the forest. Everything was in short supply. About the only thing we were gaining more of from day to day was boredom. As we'd grown accustomed to life here, there was a lot less pointless effort being expended, and a lot more time spent sitting around quietly, preserving our energy. Other than that, I suppose we at least had an effectively limitless supply of water from the spring, but since we were all using it heavily, the water needed to be boiled before we could drink. There were a number of people who found this delay irritating, sometimes skipping it entirely, myself among them, but Kazuki strongly recommended that we heat the water to 170 degrees for at least a minute, in order to kill the bacteria likely proliferating in the stream. And in fact, it seemed that chronic diarrhea had begun to spread among those who continued to drink the water raw. Diarrhea? That reminds me. What on earth? How many times do I have to tell you not to shout out of nowhere like that? I mean, for heaven's sake, you absolutely never learn, do you? Or perhaps this is some twisted little game of yours, seeing how far you can make me jump. Yeah, sorry. For the time being, how about you take a breath? You're gonna die. Do that one more time and I'm going to spank you. Firmly. Look, I said sorry, right? More importantly, hear me out for a second. What is it then? Let's make a toilet. What? Why would we go out of our way to create a breeding spot for a pathogenic no, if we use gasoline first. I see. That's one plus for starters. Kazuki? When I tentatively called her name, Kazuki instantly thrust up her right index finger. This was her signal for, wait 10 seconds. If I ignored this command and kept talking, I knew all too well Kazuki would fire right back with a forceful "don't spew out gobs of worthless noise at me when I'm not ready to listen." Then glare at me with her deep dark eyes full of cold scorn, muttering almost like a television in human form, in the disgusted tone of someone pulled out of bed by a telemarketer. I'd quickly learned to respect that signal. By now, one finger in the air from Kazuki and I fell instantly silent for 10 seconds. You could practically see my tail drooping between my legs like a dog given a firm command to wait. Honestly, I felt a little perverse admiration at how well she trained me. Yes, I think it's a good idea. I had no idea what sort of calculations Kazuki ran through in those 10 seconds to reverse her initial decision. Maybe she projected the pluses and minuses of building an outhouse through the next decade or so. Whatever the case, I had her permission to proceed with the toilet construction plan. With that settled, I headed off to ask Captain Sakashida's opinion on the matter, admittedly for the sake of form more than anything else. What did Kasami-san say? I expect you got her to approve this little plan before breathing a word of it to me, right? Well, yes. Then why not do as you please? Can you not sleep at night unless you have pushed the responsibility for every step you take onto my shoulders? That's not really what Every student club in our school had its factional disputes. In particular, the sports teams were notorious for their bitter infighting. You could fill a book with the petty spats that raged every year. Our basketball team was no exception from the rule, but it was somewhat unusual in that our conflicts never got too serious. The reason for that lay at the top. Captain Sakashida's charismatic presence would be a nice way to spin it, but to make a long story short, everyone was too afraid of her powerful family to risk making an enemy out of her. But out here, her parents' influence was no longer a prop to her authority, and as our focus narrowed to the problems immediately before us, some potential future reprisal was the last thing on anyone's mind. In other words, the captain's position was growing uncertain. Our education in that school for rich young ladies might not have provided us with many practical skills, but there was one noticeable exception. It had instilled in us a sharp sense of smell. That is to say, the ability to sniff out a winning horse in any given race. The smell of a clear winner always attracts a crowd, even when they lie at rest. Over the several days we spent in the valley, the number of people surrounding Captain Sakashida had visibly declined. Her only consistent companion was Qa'Rajh, bound to her by a simplistic sense of obligation. "Forget it, Amane, let's just go." As I stood stock still in front of the captain, trying in vain to find some response to her words, my fellow freshman Ibuki Haruna pulled me away by the hand. Ibuki Haruna, the only child of the president of a corporation headquartered in Kazukabe that imported and sold luxury foreign cars. In Kazuki's opinion, decidedly insolent despite her total ignorance of the ways of the world, listless and lazy to boot, an exemplary child of the modern era. And in the opinion of her dorm roommate, Sakuma, a total coward at heart despite constantly acting tough, and she doesn't even realize everyone knows it. "You know, you're way too much of a good girl, Amane. I keep telling you, nice guys finish last." "I don't know about that. Personally, the idea of gaining personal profit at the expense of being despised by others never really appealed to me. My mom always raised me not to be a nuisance to others. Live your life so you earn folks' gratitudes, not the scorn." "Look, you know how my dad imports foreign cars or whatever, right? You have no idea the stuff he runs into. Like, Italians, they think about their work so differently from Japanese people. Half of the time the cars they deliver are totally different color from what you ordered, completely par for the course. And when you call up to complain, you get the manager's currently taking a siesta or whatever. They can't answer the phone because they're taking a freaking nap. Seriously. After calling them over and over different times of the day, maybe you finally get a hold of the guy in charge, but he goes, "We sent the cars exactly as orders," completely bold-faced, you know? And when you tell him that can't be right, you've got the cars sitting right there and they're bright yellow, they will literally say, "Somebody must have repainted them on the boat then, not our problem." Like, how stupid do you think we are? You know what a nice guy is? Someone who takes that crap sitting down like the patsy they are. When you get down to it, calling someone a nice person is just a prettier sounding way of saying they're a weakling. It kind of feels like you're swinging a little too far to the opposite extreme. Nice person equals weakling. Trapped in the bottom of a gloomy ravine, we were all struggling to stay alive from day to day. Act like a soft-hearted good girl in such a harsh situation and you'd only be taken advantage of. It was an extreme argument, even an amoral one, but I couldn't deny there was a kernel of truth buried underneath the bitterness. Ibuki had a definite dislike for soft-hearted people from the very beginning, and she was always the sort to be vocal about her distaste. But since the fall, that element of her personality had been growing more and more pronounced and acerbic by the day. Little by little, everything was growing warped. Without food, our minds were robbed of composure as surely as our bodies were robbed of nutrients. Under such conditions, human beings lose self-restraint. They slide slowly off the rails. I watched Ibuki quietly from behind as we walked. Her school uniform was seriously grimy, not that mine was any better. No matter how diligently we washed our clothes, it was unavoidable in this place. Ibuki had been one of the more fashion-conscious girls on the team, but these last few days she hadn't even been glancing in her mirror. Without warning, she came to a stop and turned back to face me. "Huh? What were we talking about?" Oh, the story about the Italians. Right, where was I? I think you'd already finished? Really? Sorry, seems like I was kind of zoning out there. I've been getting really absent-minded lately. What a pain. Ibuki, are you feeling alright? To a greater or lesser extent, everyone had been losing weight, but Ibuki had been slim in the first place. She was edging into the emaciated territory. Her arms were as thin as branches on a withered tree where they had emerged from her sleeves. "Ibuki, did you lose weight again?" Yeah, probably. She laughed it off, getting thinner and thinner even though I'm not doing anything at all. What was the point of all the hard work I put into those diets? But I found it impossible to crack a smile in return. Too bad I don't have a scale. It'd be cool to know how many kilos I've lost. Don't skip any meals, okay? You've got to eat. Eat? Eat what? Well, when she asked point blank like that, I didn't have much to say. We both knew perfectly well there was nothing left to fill her stomach. Watching as I hesitated awkwardly, Ibuki gave a high-pitched little giggle, then turned around and walked straight off toward her tent. Human beings are malleable. Our environment changes us. Dropped into a warp position and we were slowly warping ourselves to match. Small personality shifts like Ibuki were far from the worst of it. Our extended stay in this place had given rise to far more serious problems, some of which were rapidly becoming impossible to ignore. I do apologize, Amane, but could you go pick me some more medicinal herbs? Yeah, chameleon pants again? If you'd be so kind. Also, if you could search for something edible while you're out there, it would be a big help. I'll search, but... I know, I'm not saying you have to stay out there until you find something. Just look around a bit as you gather the herbs. Please bring them to me in the large tent when you're done. Okay. The large tent. In other words, our little camp's sad excuse for a hospital. Kazuki was visiting it several times a day, conversing with and treating the wounded. Sakurai's wound had given initial indications of recovery to the point she was increasingly able to move around, but a few days ago it had apparently begun to fester. In fact, it was that very mobility that caused the problem. After many long days of lying in that humid tent, breathing air thick with pus and sweat, characteristic of a place occupied by the wounded, Sakurai snuck out in Kazuki's absence and bathed into the bacteria-laden spring. The gash in her abdomen wasn't so deep as to threaten her life, but it was by no means shallow. Thanks to her malnutrition, the laceration simply hadn't closed completely, and so it seems the bacteria invaded her body, infecting the wound. Fortunately, chameleon plants were the one thing we had an abundance of. No matter how many I picked, they seemed to grow right back. As the plants liked to grow in marshy, damp spots, all I had to do was look for places sheltered from the sun. Especially after a rainy day like yesterday, there would be large quantities waiting. The rain brought a number of other blessings, apart from the chameleon plants. In particular, a large number of snails had appeared in the forest. Mushrooms had also sprouted up, but I wasn't about to thoughtlessly start grabbing them. Kazuki had severely beaten it into my head that a moment's overconfidence or a trivial act of carelessness could prove fatal. Opening the lid of our rice cooker, I began picking a moderate number of chameleon leaves, careful not to take too many from any one plant. While I was at it, I grabbed a few snails as they crawled slowly across the nearby tree branches. Every time I tossed a snail into the makeshift bucket, its shell hit the bottom of the aluminum cooker with a sharp little rattle. Hearing that sound drove home a realization that I'd been produced to viewing slugs as food, and a surge of self-pity abruptly welled up inside me. Feeling the corners of my eyes grow hot, I sniffled in futile attempt to hold my misery inside. Crying wasn't going to help anything. I knew that all too well, but the tears still came. Don't think too much. As long as I stay alive, I'll be rescued. As long as I don't give up, I'll get home. Empty words, but I forced myself to believe them. It was the only thing that kept my hands moving. It was the only way I could see going on as anything but ridiculous. I had plucked a few dozen leaves from chameleon plants and captured 2 snails when an unpleasant surprise pulled me back to reality. Ah? Glancing down, I noticed with a start that my sock was stained a dark red. A leech had latched onto the calf of my left leg. It hung suspended from my skin, round and fat with my blood. It seems snails weren't the only slimy invertebrates that had multiplied in the wake of the torrential rain. Normally I would have shrieked at the sight of the vile little creature, probably collapsed to my knees, weeping hysterically. Instead, I grabbed the leech firmly, peeled it off the leg, and tossed it into the trees with a detached, mechanical calm that surprised myself. After removing the teeth still stuck in my leg, I carefully squeezed at the wound to wring out the leech poison. Apparently it's called Hirudin. But now that I looked, there was a numb, bleeding bite on my right leg as well. The leech had apparently drank its fill, as it was nowhere to be found. For some reason the color of my uniform felt oddly tingly against my skin. My heart thudding with cold dread, I slowly and tentatively brought my hand toward the back of my neck. My fingers brushed against the fat, slimy body, and this time I screamed. Yeah! Ripping the leech off my neck, I hurled it hard against the ground and rained a furious series of kicks down on it, but the thing just didn't want to die. As I ground the writhing leech into the mud with my heel, my own blood gushed out of little spurts from its smashed body. I was seized by such an intense, dizzying spasm of sheer loathing that I thought I might pass out on the spot. I couldn't take this anymore. I just couldn't. Lukewarm blood trickled endlessly down the back of my neck. I pressed my hand against the wound, but it just wouldn't stop. This trip was over. Just as I decided to head back, I casually glanced up at the sound of a slight rustling from above, and in the next instant a number of leeches came raining down from the overlapping tree branches overhead, aiming for me. Eek! Clutching the mess kit tightly to my chest, I ran stumbling out of the forest as fast as my legs would carry me. Listen very carefully, city dwellers. I'm willing to bet some of y'all have been known to say things like, I love nature, being out here in the green heals my soul, or whatever, yes? Well, if you ever find yourself in need of a broken nose, try repeating it when I'm in the room. Those tight little trails you hike down, with their trimmed trees and color-edged maps, porta potties and rest stations, that's an artificial playground for human beings. In that moment, watching the unceasing trickle of blood seeping into my uniform, I came to hate nature from the bottom of my heart. Get a hold of yourself. There are some people who'd love to have this meal, you know that? When I returned with the mess kit covered in my own blood, I heard a snarling voice inside the large tent. Captain Shakashita's here. I hesitated for a moment at the entrance. Looking around, I saw the rest of the girls in the area were similarly frozen in awkward uncertainty, looking deliberately away from the tent but clearly listening. I couldn't just do nothing. Maybe just nonchalantly popping in there would drain some of the tension in the air. Heaving a single heavy sigh, I braced myself emotionally, then stooped down and passed through the open tent flap. We might have called it a large tent, but it wasn't exactly spacious as hospitality goes. When I crawled inside, the scent of closely packed sedentary bodies was as thick as always. And today, the droning of flies filled the air. This was a more recent development. Apparently the smell of blood and pus had grown strong enough to prove an irresistible attraction. No matter how many flies we drove off or swatted, there was always more to take their place. The interior was unevenly illuminated by sunshine flowing through gaps in the tree canopy. I could see Hiroka-san and Sakurai lying at the opposite ends of the tent, attended at the bedside by Captain Sakashita and Kazuki respectively. Come on, eat up. You're going to eat this, understand? You have a responsibility to... No, this is an order. Eat it. Captain Shakashita scooped some gruel out of a Sierra cup in her hand and pushed the spoon forward, but Hiroka-san bit her lower lip and turned her face aside, rejecting the food outright. I'm not hungry. Don't be ridiculous. How many times do I have to tell you? We can't afford to put up with you being selfish right now. I understand that it tastes bad, but choke it down. I myself had nursed Hiroka numerous times over the last week. She'd never accepted much in the way of food, but the last few days in particular she hadn't eaten anything remotely approaching a meal. With both legs broken, she was almost entirely unable to move. Spending all day lying down would probably tend to reduce your appetite, and when you happen to be lying down in a confined space reeking of pus and dirt and sweat, hunger pangs might well be less of a problem than containing your nausea. The high fever from her fractures lasted 3 days, during which we were forced to keep her on a purely liquid diet. Even after her temperature fell, the most she could keep down was a light rice gruel with practically no added ingredients, and even that watery broth she sipped very slowly and in small quantities. Please, just stop. Have mercy. Hiroka-san grated out the words through gritted teeth, her contorted expression begging for a reprieve. As she squeezed her eyes shut, small tears spilled from the corners of her eyes. Mercy! What on earth? Don't try to turn me into the villain here. You make it sound as if I'm bullying you. The captain jerked back the spoon and noisily slammed the aluminium cup to the floor in obvious irritation. The porridge inside was surprisingly thick with rice. Unlike our typical watered-down wheat soups, it was a legitimate gruel. Compared to the relatively healthy members of the group, the wounded needed more nourishment to help their bodies heal. They must have been receiving preferential rations. At a quick glance, there seemed to be as much rice in that one bowl as I received in a single day. If anything, you should be thanking us, you know? How can you talk to me like that? Why do you think we're giving special treatment to invalids who can't even work? But before the next angry words in this sequence could spill out of Captain Shakashida's mouth, Kazuki, who had been silently cleaning Sakurai's stomach wound the whole time, finally interjected. You're attempting to force her to do something she clearly doesn't want to do. If that's not bullying, what is? Captain Shakashida turned to face Kazuki's back, glaring so fiercely I half expected her to pop a blood vessel. You are aware of exactly how precious this handful of rice is to us right now, aren't you? Yes, of course. Nonetheless, your approach to this situation is misguided. If Kazuki noticed the captain's furious glare, she gave no sign of it. Not even bothering to turn around, she continued treating Sakurai as she spoke. It seems you may have gotten the idea that to lead under these circumstances, you need to become a forceful presence, whose words is absolute. Perhaps you've decided that you can't go easy on anyone. However, when popular sentiment wants you to play the kind-hearted, compassionate leader in relation to the weak, isn't it more strategically sound to show them a bit of what they want to see? In other words, I should follow your example, show everyone some sly and sincere facade? Yes, do try to follow my example in the slyness department. As you're somewhat dim-witted, you've picked up an unfortunate habit of trying to forcibly smash your way through every problem. Ugh! Oh god, oh god, oh god, stop it, Kazuki! The tent was unpleasantly humid enough to begin with. I really could have done without the nasty cold sweat now drenching my back. I believe we'll be quite alright in here without your continued assistance. Might I respectfully suggest you consider returning to your tent? I've got something to discuss with you later. Would you mind stopping by my tent? Goodness, how frightening. May I bring Amane along as well? I'm afraid I lack the courage to pay your visit alone. Feel free. As she spat out those words, Captain Shakashida's dark, angry eyes flashed over to settle on me. What? Don't get me mixed up in this. Do not get me mixed up in this, Kazuki. Pierced by the captain's loathing glare, I stiffened in the entrance of the tent like a rock, managing to respond only with a terrified gulp. Maybe she realized how awkward I felt about the whole thing. Maybe not. Either way, Captain Shakashida gave a little snort and pushed right past me and out of the tent. Kazuki! What now? Kindly spare me the pathetic moaning. First of all, were you able to obtain the herbs? Yeah, I did pick some. I quickly opened the mess kit I'd been carrying. At some point, the snails I'd captured had glued themselves to the opposite side of the lid. Thank you. Kazuki grabbed a number of chameleon plant leaves from the aluminium cooker, crumpled them in her hand, and deftly began to apply them to the area around Sakurai's wound. Does it sting? Just a bit, but a little pain is better than the itchiness. Thank you as always. Amane was the one who picked the herbs. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, you're welcome. Sakurai-senpai was as placid and soft-spoken as always. Even in the fairly tomboyish basketball team, she'd been generally admired as the greatest beauty in the group. I didn't know the exact details, but apparently her father was a famous stage actor and her mother a former idol singer. Born to two such people, it was perhaps unsurprising that she turned out as lovely as she did. Against such a contrast, the ugly jagged wound across her abdomen and its crude stitches were all the more painful to look at. Alright, we're done. Please head out of the tent and get yourself some sun. I'm very much obliged to you. The presence of the wound must still have been a source of unease, if not discomfort to her. As Sakurai slowly rose from the ground, her hands softly traced the gash from above the freshly applied bandages. With a brief polite bow to Kazuki, she quietly crawled out of the tent. Even stuck in a mess like this, Sakurai-senpai is still really beautiful. It would be best not to say that to her face. She's a clumsy actress and rather tone-deaf to boot, so it seems she convinced herself her looks are the only redeeming feature. Even words intended as a compliment might end up reinforcing her low opinion of herself. Really? In that case, the ugly wound to her stomach must have been a considerable psychological shock. I turned around to peer at the open flat of the tent. As Sakurai slowly walked off into the distance, her shoulders seemed to be sagging. If nothing else, I suppose we should be thankful she wasn't wounded on her face like Kaneda-san. To be sure, that would have been even harder on her. But Kaneda herself didn't seem particularly depressed. Maybe she was just counting herself lucky to have survived. I suppose she might have just might have been the sort to not sweat the small stuff. She didn't whine about the gash on her head, but by the same token, she wouldn't come to have the wound treated unless we called for her. In any case, we have more pressing concern at the moment. Hiroka-san? Yes. I'm very sorry it took me so long to notice. What are you talking about? The reason you've been refusing your food. As she spoke, Kazuki reached out for the zipper of Hiroka-san's tightly closed sleeping bag. Wait, please, no. I understand that it's embarrassing, but we can't just leave it like this. Kazuki's voice was far more gentle than I'd ever heard it before. Nonetheless, Hiroka-san broke into painful, bitter sobs, like a child begging for forgiveness. She turned her head to the side, her gaze coming to rest on me. There were fat teardrops rolling down her cheeks. Amane, would you be so kind to boil me some hot water? How much? About a bucketful. No need to rush, but I would appreciate it. Yeah, sure. As I turned to leave, a sharp new smell cut through the stuffy air of the tent, and I finally understood the situation. Hiroka-san soiled herself? Right, at the moment she couldn't even stand up on her own power. With a little maneuvering, she'd probably be able to handle a number 1 by herself, but a number 2 would absolutely require external assistance. Hiroka-san had always been the most timid and introverted member of our team. Even under the best of circumstances, she found it difficult to assert herself. She must simply have been too humiliated to ask for the help she needed. In other words, she'd been refusing food for the last few days out of sheer terror of producing waste. It all fell horribly into place in an instant. Her body racked with sobs, Hiroka buried her face into her hands. Kazuki spoke to her again, her voice like a comforting caress. You have nothing to be ashamed of. It's a natural part of being alive. Slightly unsettled by Kazuki's uncharacteristic kindness, I hastily left the tent. What's up with that, Kazuki? There's no way she'd ever be that nice to me. All of a sudden there was a complex and intense mixture of feelings. Unease, irritation, anxiety, and others I couldn't quite put into words, swirling unpleasantly around in my chest. If you like Hiroka that much, why don't you marry her? Hold on a second here, Self. What did you just say? I mean, what? You'd almost think I was jealous or something. Well, now that I think about it, maybe I really am a little jealous. But Kazuki and I are both girls, so, now what exactly is going on here? Sometimes pet dogs get all cranky when they see their masters doting on someone else's mutt. Maybe this is something similar? I knew it was downright weird for me to be feeling this way, but the irritation was real, and it wasn't going away. Maybe I should just throw my dignity to the wind and give her a nasty bite the next time she tries to give me a treat. Unless I'm very much mistaken, you're thinking some exceptionally silly thoughts right now. Kazuki, what? I don't know what you're talking about. I trust you more than anyone else, and I'm relying on you more than anyone else. That's a fact. Wherever I may go, in the end I'll return to you. All you need to do is wait with dignity and confidence. What are you talking about? You really don't understand? I'm telling you that you are indispensable to me. Come here, Amane. Why? You're bleeding from the neck. Yeah, a leech bit me, but it doesn't hurt, so don't worry about it. But look, the blood's still flowing. If you leave it be, you'll be bleeding for hours, you know? Hurry up and get over here. Kazuki reached her small arms up, drawing my head down toward her, then pressed her lips against the scruff of my neck. After briefly running her tongue along the area of the leech bite, she began to suck the wound. Stop! What? Sugi, not so hard, you're gonna suck it right out of me. Don't worry, I'll suck out every last drop. What the hell is this? Why does this have to be so pointlessly erotic? Kazuki's lips, they're small and soft and kind of feel nice. This isn't good. Now I'm getting in a weird mood. She sucked the blood and an anticoagulant out of my neck until her mouth was full, spat it out, then came right back for more. I understood she was performing medical treatment, but every time Kazuki's lips touched me, my body quivered. Every time she exhaled through her nose, her breath tickled my cheek, and strange little noises leaked out of my mouth. In a daze, my eyes half closed, I whimpered nasally. It took a good minute for me to notice that Takuma-senpai was standing nearby, her arms folded, taking in the whole scene with a smirk on her face. Wow, gotta say you two are pretty brazen. No, you got it all wrong. This isn't what you think. She's just sucking the... Right, a leech. It was a leech. I got bitten by a leech in the forest and the bleeding wouldn't stop, so Kazuki just... Hey, don't get me wrong. I'm not casting any stones here. Love comes in many shapes and sizes, in my humble opinion. Look, I'm trying to tell you, this isn't an act of love or anything. She's just treating my wound. Licking each other's wound isn't an act of love? Who are you trying to convince with all the excuses anyway? Well, I fully understand how enjoyable it is to bully Amane, but that's my special privilege as her partner. Please refrain from teasing her too much, Sakuma-senpai. What a tyrant. Amane belongs to everyone, you know? Well, feel free to think so if you please. So, what is it then? Did you have some business with my Amane? You got a surprisingly possessive side, huh? Well, whatever. You're making a toilet, right? The captain stopped by a while ago and told us we should come over to help if we weren't busy. Ah, that'd be a big help, thank you. Don't mention it. Ain't like I got anything better to do. And when I'm not doing something, I get all depressed. Maybe it's just me, but when I'm moving my body, I don't feel quite so miserable. Sitting on my hands all day makes me feel a lot more worn out. So, anyway, we'll be borrowing Amane for a bit. My apologies, Kazami. Very well then. Do make sure to handle her with great care. Kazuki? It's fine if she starts thinking of you as some convenient maid who's always at her beck and call. It's always at your beck and call. Your life's gonna get even harder. A little absence makes the heart grow, whatever. Come on, let's go. Okay. The last few days, both Captain Sakashita and Mr. Ochi had been absent from the camp more often than not. They were supposedly investigating the forest, but we hadn't got much specific information about what that involved. With our teacher, the team's official figurehead, and the captain, its true leader, both absent, the majority of the group looked to Kasami Kazuki for orders. To be perfectly honest, there were a considerable number of people who openly scowled at the idea of accepting instructions from an arrogant, sharp-tongued freshman. But by nature, people turned to competence over formal authority in times of crisis. And it was simply a fact that our efficiency as a group increased when command of the camp passed from Captain Sakashita to Kazuki. She carefully assessed everyone's personality and skills and assigned them appropriate jobs, placing a moderate responsibility on every individual's shoulders. Through a consistent distribution of tasks, we all had become naturally aware of our roles, quickly learning to bring certain tasks to certain people without her direct intervention. She created a framework that enabled us to be productive. This toilet construction operation was a good example. Kazuki didn't stand on the sidelines directing us, but her initial planning divided us into our teams. One group dug the hole, one group repurposed a chair from the bus into a seat, and one group focused on creating a sturdy roof that wouldn't leak in heavy rain. And she designed a clear procedure for the job, with logical, easy-to-remember steps carefully tuned to compensate for our small number of workers. By following her instructions, we managed to finish the job rather quickly. The completed toilet wasn't much to look at, granted. In fact, it was unmistakably a ramshackle hut slapped together by novice carpenters, but it was functional enough. Of particular note was our makeshift septic tank, filled with gasoline extracted from the bus. As an effective countermeasure against flies, maggots and other pests, it helped erase our concerns about creating a hub for transmitted disease. If Kazuki hadn't been there, I doubt we could have come up with that idea, much less implemented it. Given such clear displays of competence, even those who disliked Kazuki on a personal level were growing increasingly reliant on her leadership, although in some cases only grudgingly and out of necessity. As the sun declined in the west and the fierce heat and the humidity finally began to die down, I set about making wheat soup using a meager allocation of rice and the vegetables we've been able to gather in the forest. Today the job was far larger than it had been at first. For quite some time, every pair had carefully prepared supper for themselves, probably out of paranoia about the possibility of having some of the food snatched secretly away, but for the last few days I'd increasingly been assuming the role of the camp cook. I went along with the new responsibility easily enough, since I'd been preparing meals for the wounded Hiruka and Sakurai all along. Increasing the quantity to feed more of the group wasn't really much of a hassle. I guess everyone finally figured, might as well just leave the cooking to the girl who grew up in a restaurant or something. Probably another effect of Kazuki's emphasis on efficiently dividing our workload. As I struck a fire under the primitive cooking furnace, we'd constructed from moderately sized stones, the various pairs brought forward their mess kits, offering up all the ingredients they had on hand. Apart from the small quantities of rice and vegetables distributed at the beginning of the day, each aluminum rice cooker had a range of unidentifiable weeds and wild grasses picked from the forest. Today there were quite a few number of snails as well. Surprisingly, Komori had gathered most of the small slimy creatures and above average quantity, although an extremely random assortment of vegetation to boot. She'd taken a pet dog into the forest and walked a good ways in, gathering anything that seemed even vaguely edible, then found her way back to the camp without a hitch. Apparently the dog had memorized the way back by scent. After that first success, Komori made a daily habit of approaching Kazuki with random plants that caught her eye on such trips, asking which might be edible. When night came, my short-sleeved uniforms were, as always, inadequate protection against the chill air. Having finished our dinner, Kazuki and I set off for the large tent and half-forced Hiroka to eat. With that finished, we finally made our way to Captain Shakashida's tent as we promised earlier in the day. She was waiting for us with Koide-senpai inside their tent. Inside the tent where a small candle provided some dim, flickering illumination. Good evening. Kazuki offered a polite greeting, her tone of voice suggesting she'd just arrived fashionably late to a high society gathering. Captain Sakashida responded with a curt, "There you are," then glanced at Koide and gave a little jerk of her head, prompting her partner to leave the tent. "Come in." Inviting us to sit with a sardonic "sorry I can't offer you any tea," Captain Shakashida got right down to business before we even settled ourselves on the ground. "How are the wounded?" "Their condition isn't deteriorating, but they are not recovering either." "I see. For one thing, Hiroka-san's broken legs wouldn't have fixed themselves in a few days, even under ideal circumstances. And Sakurai-senpai's abdominal wound was healing very slowly, and thanks to a worsening state of malnutrition, the absence of antibiotics to fight her infection. As an added misery, the intense heat and humidity had left her with a painful skin condition. Even the comparatively light wounded Kaneda's health needed to be monitored closely, given the poor sanitary conditions of the camp. For the last few humid days, she'd been complaining about her wound's constant itchiness. We warned her repeatedly not to scratch, but yet she had nonetheless picked up a troublesome habit of sticking twigs under her bandage, tearing at her stitches. And apart from those who'd been wounded in a crash, many of the healthy girls were beginning to show increasingly advanced symptoms of malnutrition. Faces were swelling noticeably as our vitamin deficiencies grew more pronounced. Some girls had begun to complain of minor ailments. To be honest, we were past the point of monitoring the situation closely. It was slowly but surely crumbling before our eyes. Captain Shakashida listened to this summary from start to finish in silence. When it was over, she again answered with a brief, "I see." After a moment, she leaned forward to look into Katsuki's face and spoke, and for a moment I disbelieved my ears. "In other words, the food we're giving the injured is going to waste?" "That's not..." With a start, I realized why Captain Shakashida had driven Koide from the tent. Whatever the circumstances, she was our leader, and in speaking those words, she had just betrayed that responsibility. Maybe we'd all thought the same, in some dark corner of our mind, but no one had voiced that ugly thought, and now the captain had coolly thrown it out into the open. She understood as well as we did that a quiet, crippling pessimism regarding the food situation had begun to spread among the group. If we were to continue on these meager rations, the currently able-bodied girls would eventually be reduced to invalids. Without adequate nourishment, our physical strength would be drained, sapping us of the energy to work, and with our bodies weakened, disease would spread all too easily around the camp. Simply by existing, the wounded were acting as heavy drain on our precious supply of food. Their presence was reducing everyone else's ration. Ultimately, this might soon give rise to more sick people, exponentially worsening the problem. When we weigh the lives of the wounded and the healthy against each other, the former will always be lighter on the scales. In this harsh environment, that pragmatic calculation felt all the more obvious. We don't have the elbow room to be handing out rations to those who can't work. The captain's argument was coherent enough, and I understood that she had little choice but to approach her situation with a conservative caution. But nonetheless, her words sounded like a betrayal, a justification of unburdening ourselves of a load that had grown troublesome to carry. An excuse to abandon our friends and save ourselves. "You're the one who told me to be sly, Kasami-san. Remember that?" "Yes, I certainly did. However, I don't believe I would categorize demonizing the weak as particularly sly. If anything, it strikes me as petty escapism." "Well then, tell me, do you have enough provisions stocked away to keep the weak fed?" "No, unfortunately not." Talk is cheap and reality is harsh. If you're so compassionate, how about sparing a thought for the majority who are being slowly sapped of their energy thanks to this little good girl act of yours? Those spiteful words were all too clearly a deliberate act of revenge for Kazuki's insult this afternoon. Whether she was at a loss for words or simply too exasperated to speak wasn't clear, but Kazuki offered no reply other than a short, tired little sigh. I had long before decided to keep my silence and leave this conversation entirely to Kazuki, but all of a sudden I found myself unable to suppress the need to object. This is just too much. Are you planning to have us sit there and let the wounded starve to death? I didn't say that, did I? For the first time in the conversation, the captain turned to me. She'd grown gaunt in the recent days, leaving her cheekbones pressed so prominent that her eyes seemed to have sunken in her face. It made her grim gaze seem all the more severe. I'm going to lower the relative priority of their meals. That's all. It's not as though I'm going to completely cut off their food. Of course, we'll be continuing to distribute them a modest ration. It's only reasonable, isn't it? Sitting around all day seems to decrease appetite. That's not true. There was another reason Hiroka-san had refused to eat that afternoon, and with the construction of the toilet, that problem had been eliminated. We could simply help her to the toilet seat and let her relieve herself in privacy, removing the biggest psychological roadblock to her recovery. It's alright, Amane. The captain's definitely not wrong about this. But I'll share my portion of the rations with Hiroka-san. Huh? I assume that would be acceptable. Why are you asking me? It's your food. You can do with it as you please. Then that's just what I'll do. Kazumi leaned forward in a very slight bow as she stood. Lightly speaking the words, "Let's return," in my general direction, she abruptly left the tent. Wait, Kazuki. Yes? What's the matter? You know perfectly well what the matter is. Why didn't you fight back? Because I thought it would be a waste of breath. I was so sure you'd go at her if you'd just objected to her logic or something. I'm sure you could have talked your way past her, like always. What are you talking about? Objection is only possible when someone acts or speaks in an objectionable way, when they're outright wrong, or when you dislike the solution to the matter at hand. Yeah, but someone under other circumstances and you're merely fault fighting. Remember the distinction. The heck does that mean? I don't get it at all, Kazuki. Didn't you hear me earlier? The captain's argument was logically sound. Even so, giving the wounded less food is just wrong. And that's why I'm sharing my portion with Hiroka-san. No problem. Of course there's a problem. Maybe it slipped your mind, but you're injured too, Kazuki. Yes, I know. You're sure not acting like it. Look, why don't we just head back to the captain right now and try to get her to reconsider? If you charge in there and tell her this is wrong straight out, it'll definitely work out somehow. Let's at least try. Goodness, you make me sound like some hysterical woman who's just itching to pick a fight. It's not as though I rush about lodging my objections to all the world's wrongs, you know? Really? Personally, I kind of had this image of Kazuki waving a battle flag emblazoned with the words, "We must correct the world," on some vague battlefield. Then charging forth at the head of a vanguard, all Jeanne d'Arc style, leading a glorious crusade across the mistake-riddled modern age. You'll be hard-pressed to find another woman as tolerant of mistakes as I am, you know? Just think about it. Have you ever heard me ask Captain Takashita, "Tell me why you were born?" Even once? No, but, huh? Hold on a second, did you just say something seriously terrible? That, kind of sounded like an indirect way of implying that girls should never have been born, to me. It seems you've come to understand how deeply tolerant and charitable the spirit I really am, yes? In that case, let's head back to the tent already. I'm starting to get rather tired. Nothing keeps you from your beauty sleep, does it? It was already past 9 p.m. I looked up through the trees to the sky, empty except for the bright moon and twinkling stars. The helicopter we'd seen for a brief moment on the second day had been absent ever since. I strained my ears but heard only the chirping of bugs. No cars running on the road above. Nothing. Why hasn't anybody noticed? There's a group of girls right down here, suffering so much. I was seized by the meaningless desire to scream for help at the moon, but I knew I'd only be making my throat hoarse. That early summer night, only the lonesome voices of insects echoed through the rocky valley. And that's where we'll end the episode. So, we shall see what happens on the 8th day in the next episode. But until then, take care.